Okay, chapter 6. Chapter 6, basically we need to talk all about photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? We're converting the sun, solar energy, into chemical energy of a carbohydrate, and specifically we're creating glucose. So sometimes you'll see C6H12O6. That is the chemical formula for glucose. There are some plant structures you should be familiar with. So why am I bothering to talk about carbon dioxide and oxygen? So the equation for photosynthesis, I'm going to take carbon dioxide plus water plus sunlight, and I'm going to turn it into glucose plus oxygen. So there has to be a way to get the carbon dioxide in, and there has to be a way to get the oxygen out. So there's a structure within a plant cell called a stoma, and the stoma is an opening for gas exchange. These will also become important, these thylakoid membranes. So this is a stack of thylakoids, so they call the stack granum. This is a thylakoid membrane, and inside is the thylakoid space. This is the site of photosynthesis. And all of this occurs within that structure, that chloroplast, that we found only in plants, right? Chloroplast only in plants. Alright, so again, here is the reaction for photosynthesis. We're going to take carbon dioxide, we're going to take water, we're going to take the sun, and we're going to get out a sugar and oxygen. This is the same thing as this. It's just they're telling you how many. This is a general term for carbohydrate. Again, I could also write this equation that way. It would be the same exact thing. Excuse me. Okay, some of the confusing parts to this slide is when we talk about, oh, come on, you really don't want to do that? It's being difficult. Hold on one second. Okay, a redox versus an oxidation versus a reduction, which is what we call a redox reaction. So a reduction, and this seems silly, but a reduction is the gain of electrons. So we are going to add items to carbon dioxide to get out glucose. We are going to take items away from water to oxygen. We're going to remove items. Sometimes you'll hear people say, Leo the lion says grr. So a loss of electrons is oxidation. A gain of electrons is called a reduction. I know it sounds silly, but that's how it is. Okay, so it's a little more complicated. We have to look at the whole picture. Then we have to break down photosynthesis into the light reactions and then into the Calvin cycle. So if you look around the outside, this is the initial reaction, right? So these are the items that go in. This is the input, sometimes called the reactants. Spell it out. And then these are the products. Again, I could write the equation, right? Solar energy plus water plus carbon dioxide yields a carbohydrate plus oxygen. But what we need to do, I wish my pen would come back. What we need to do is talk about, now it wants to work, okay. What we need to do is talk about not only this equation, but also the many equations that are happening inside. Okay, so if you split this down the middle, these are going to be the light reactions because they depend on light, and these are going to be the light independent reactions because they'll happen with or without light. So we're going to look at the light reactions, the light independent reactions, and then we'll look at the overall process again. So this is where it becomes tricky. So if I said list reactants of photosynthesis. So what goes in for photosynthesis? Sun, water, carbon dioxide. Now if I said list reactants of light dependent reaction. Water, sun, that's it. Those are the items that have to go in for the light dependent reactions. All right, so basically I want to make sure that we understand the visible light. So we're talking about a visible light spectrum. It's here between UV and infrared. We have different wavelengths of light that correspond to different colors. What we need to look at are these chlorophyll molecules. This is where we're actually exciting electrons and generating some of this electron excitement that's going to eventually help us make a carbohydrate. One of the things I did want to point out, so this is the absorption spectrum of photosynthetic pigments. What they're saying is this part and this part of the light is picked up by the pigments in chloroplasts. So a lot of C words here. Chloroplast, that's that green structure within the plant cell. Chlorophyll are these little pigments or proteins that are inside the chloroplast. What I want you to notice right here is that the pigments in chloroplasts do not like green light. They do not absorb green light. They don't need green light. So this is why plants are green. The plant absorbs all of the wavelengths of light, but it only needs these in this area or here. This area, this green yellow color, is reflected back, and that's why plants are viewed as green. Okay, this looks complicated, and it kind of is. I will try to break it down for you, and then I'll show you inside of the thylakoid membrane. So here is our chloroplast, right? And then here's our thylakoid membrane, and we're looking at just the light reactions right now. So what's going in? Energy, solar energy, sunlight, and water. What's going to come out? Oxygen, and we're going to make these two products, NADPH and ATP. And they're actually going to get fed into the secondary cycle. Okay, so here's our water. Basically what happens is water gets split. So water gets split into hydrogens and oxygen. And the reason this says H+, do we remember our hydrogen? It had one proton on the inside and it had one electron on the outside. So if I take this electron and I strip it away, the only thing hydrogen has left is this P, so that's why they write H+. So I strip the electron off of the hydrogens. These H pluses come out, and then I have some oxygen here. This electron gets passed to photosystem 2, and again I realize this is confusing. Photosystem 2 is before photosystem 1 and has to do with the order in which we found them and also some evolutionary mechanisms. But basically this electron gets bounced around in this pigment complex. When I say pigment complex, I'm talking about those chlorophyll pigments. Where's all of this happening? In chloroplast, right? Inside the thylakoid membrane. So this electron gets bounced around and gets energized because the sun is shining on it. This electron eventually gets so excited it reaches this electron acceptor state. It travels down this electron transport chain. ATP is made in this process. We'll come back and look at that. Then the electron gets to photosystem 1 and it bounces around these pigments. It gets excited again to the point of this electron acceptor. Now my electrons come out of photosystem 1. The electrons bind with the hydrogen and something called NADP+. This is a cofactor that is going to bind electrons and bind hydrogens and take them to a specific location where they can be used. And we're going to see that NADPH is going to go into the Calvin cycle, and I'll show you more when we get there. So we have water being split. When water is split, the hydrogens come off. Maybe I should go back and erase some of this so that we can start all over again. You should be able to follow some of the processes and what's going on in terms of each individual molecule. All right, so let's just look at the electron first. Water is split. The electron goes to photosystem 2. It bounces around the pigment. It goes up to the electron acceptor, goes through the electron transport chain, goes to photosystem 1, bounces around again. The electron gets excited. The electrons come out of photosystem 1. They bind with NADP and H plus to form NADPH. What happens to the hydrogens? Well, when water splits, the hydrogens come off. Where can those hydrogens go? Well, one of the places the hydrogen can bind with the NADP and the electrons to form NADPH. So think about some questions. Where do the electrons that enter photosystem 2 and photosystem 1, where do the electrons come from originally? They come from water. Where do the hydrogens that bind with NADP and the electrons to form NADPH, where do these hydrogens originally come from? Water. Okay, let's look at this entire cycle inside the thylakoid membrane. So again, we're talking about the thylakoid membrane. That's this structure here, and there's space in between. And we're looking at exactly the same situation, except for it's inside the thylakoid rather than being kind of an art drawing. So here's photosystem 2, here's photosystem 1, here's the sun shining, here's the sun shining, here's our water. Our water gets split into hydrogen and oxygen, right? Now you see the hydrogens kind of floating here, the hydrogens come out here, and then the hydrogens can also come back up here and form with NADPH. But let's follow the electron again. So the electron goes into photosystem 2. It gets excited. This entire section right here is the electron transport chain that we just showed you. So the electron moves through the electron transport chain. It goes to photosystem 1. It gets excited. It goes out this enzyme, NADP reductase. It takes the electrons and the hydrogens. It adds it to NADP plus, and now you have NADPH. So the electrons and the hydrogens that form NADPH originally came from water that the plant took in. Let's look at these hydrogens and see how ATP is created in this process. So the hydrogen that's split from water, again this is hydrogen from water, travels through the thylakoid space, and it travels through this molecule or enzyme called ATP synthase. It does exactly what it says. It generates or synthesizes ATP. So the hydrogen, as it flows through, they're trying to show you with the arrows that as the hydrogen flows through, it whips around the ATP synthase and it generates enough energy to turn ADP plus P into ATP. Remember, what do we have to add to ADP plus P? We have to add energy if we want to get ATP out, right? Do you notice, though, that the hydrogen does not have anything to do with creating the ATP or the phosphate and the ADP? It just causes the turbine to move, which generates enough electricity. That is called chemiosmosis. So basically, chemiosmosis is generating ATP using hydrogen ions to produce energy. This hydrogen ion doesn't bind anywhere over here. This hydrogen ion comes back up over here and binds to form NADPH. So What allows ATP to be generated during photosynthesis? The flow of hydrogen ions through ATP synthase generates enough energy to turn ADP and P into ATP, and that process is called chemiosmosis. All right, so now we have to talk about the Calvin cycle, and it's great that we have this picture up here. So remember, all of this is the light reaction we just talked about. We made ATP and NADPH in the light reaction. And you should be able to go back and tell me the difference, right? I said, so light reaction, what do you make? Light reaction, you make NADPH, you make ATP, and what comes out is waste, oxygen. So these are outputs. What's the input for light reaction? You have to put in water, and you have to put in sunlight. If you want to get super technical, you have to put in ADP plus P, and you have to put in NADP plus. But these are not the same as the overall photosynthesis, right? Overall photosynthesis. Input is water, sun, CO2. Output is oxygen and carbohydrate, right? Okay. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page before we move on to this even more complex Calvin cycle. Okay. So this can get a little complicated. Let's just try to focus on the big picture rather than all these little numbers everywhere. So do you see how this is 5-carbon molecule? It's called RUBP. You don't really have to worry about the name as long as you know RUBP. So a carbon dioxide comes in, and I know there's 3's in front of all of this. It takes 3 turns to actually generate a glucose molecule. That's why they show you 3. But let's just focus on 1 for right now. So if I take 5 carbons and I add 1 carbon, I now have 6 carbons, right? So that's what this molecule is right here. It's a 6 carbon. And then we're going to split this 6 carbon into 2 3-carbon molecules. So now we have a 3 carbon. We're going to add some energy. So if ATP goes in and ADP plus P comes out, what did you have to put in? What did you drop off? Energy. Now remember NADPH that we made. What is NADPH carrying? It's carrying electrons and it's carrying hydrogens. Well, guess what? If NADPH goes in and NADP comes out, what did you do with these? You dropped those off to the reaction. So the long and short of this cycle is we're taking a 5 carbon, we're adding a 1 carbon to it, we're making it a 6 carbon, then we're dividing it into 2 3 carbons, and we're manipulating or modifying this molecule to get it exactly like we want it, which is called G3P. Basically, if I take 2 G3Ps, I can make a glucose quite easily. So what am I doing with the light reaction products? So what did I make? I made ATP and I made NADPH. Let me erase some of this. Oh, wait. Okay. So ATP and NADPH, I'm dropping off energy, hydrogens, and electrons, and I'm using these to take this molecule and turn it into this molecule. So we need to modify and make little adjustments to turn the 3PG into the G3P. And then if I take 2 of those G3Ps, I can make glucose. And I'm talking me, but I'm a plant, right? Now, the only other thing we have to do is we have to take these leftover G3Ps, and we have to turn this back into RUBP. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a 5 here, so you have 5 3 carbons, that's 15 carbons, right? And we have here 5 5 carbons, right? So 3 5 carbons, this is 15. So basically what we're doing is we're taking ATP, dropping it off, adding energy, and converting this 3 carbon into a 5 carbon so we can start this process over again. What do you notice in terms? It says regeneration. So we add carbon dioxide, we add ATP, we add NADPH, we turn this 3 carbon into this 3 carbon, and if we take 2 of those, we can make glucose. With what's left over, we regenerate, so we have RUBP, so the next round can continue. If RUBP wasn't there, we wouldn't be able to use the cycle anymore. We wouldn't be able to make more glucose. So here's where the tricky questions come in. This is carbon dioxide, right? What is glucose? Remember I said it is this chemical formula, right? So the carbons in glucose and the oxygens in glucose come from where? They come from carbon dioxide that the plant took in. Where do these hydrogens come from? Remember that the hydrogen in NADPH ultimately came from water. So where does the hydrogen in sugar or glucose come from? It comes from the water that the plant took in. All right, well, we're finished with chapter 6. Hopefully that helped a little bit. I'll see you guys in chapter 7.